I have 3 children with special educational needs. Pregnancy wasn't great, had a problematic pregnancy, and then my eldest son Kane arrived and it was great, and we spent the first 4 months thinking it was everything was okay. He was a really good baby. He didn't sleep through the night, that was the only downside, but babies didn't. I didn't question it. And then when he was 5 months old, I decided to go to a mother and baby group just to see another adult, and walked in, thought getting weighed while we're here, as you do, all that, getting weighed, getting measured. And there was a health visitor there, and she measured his head and said to me, I think we need to get you in to see the doctor. His head seems quite big. I went home, rang my husband, said, they've said I've got to go and see the doctor, his head's a bit big. Okay, so when's that happening? I don't know, you know what it's like, our doctors, it'll be a few weeks yet. And literally put the phone down, and I got a phone call from the doctors saying, can you come up? We've got an appointment for you at 12:30. And so I knew something wasn't right, and we were taken straight in, and we knew something was going on because all the staff had been looking at us and sympathy looks. We walked into a doctor sat with a textbook out, and she said, we think your son might have something called hydrocephalus, and we had no idea what that meant. So they arranged for on the Monday morning for us to see a consultant, and we went in and they measured my head and they measured my husband's head, and they said to us, actually, your heads are very big, you have big heads, so we may not be anything to worry about, you might just have big head like his mum and dad. And we went into a room, and I remember there being a consultant and 2 doctors, and they were doing an ultrasound. And as they started doing the ultrasound on his head, all the laughter just suddenly stopped. And I remember knowing that it was going to be bad news. And they told us, luckily we had an amazing doctor, Dr. Martin, I will never forget this man. He told us that my son would need emergency brain surgery, and that he would have to have a valve put in his brain. We went the next day and had an MRI. And the next day we got a phone call from Keynes saying, can you bring your son up, we need to operate. And I remember signing a form that said it was okay for him to have the operation, but there were so many risks involved. He took him down the next morning, he was first on the list, and he came back out, he'd had a shunt, a valve put into his brain to drain off the fluid. And then very soon after that we realised I was pregnant again. Again, children hadn't been on the agenda, it was a real shocker. But we thought I'd had a miscarriage, and I went to have a scan to confirm that I'd miscarried, only to be told it was really common to bleed when you're having twins. And then the twins arrived really early. I had them at just before 29 weeks. I developed full-blown eclampsia and was fitting, and they had to be delivered. They weighed less than 2.5 pounds each, and I had them on the Saturday morning, and I didn't get to see them until Sunday because I was so poorly. And then on the Sunday night I got to hold Rosie, and it was a week later before I was allowed to hold Jamie because he was so poorly, and it was very touch and go as to whether he was going to make it. But he did. But as a result of being poorly, he lost his vision, he lost his sight, his retinas didn't develop, and his retinas, the bits that had developed, detached from his eyes. We knew there was surgery that could be done. All these people who were saying that they could maybe buckle it back on, and eventually we had an amazing consultant at Keynes, and he rang round everybody for us, and we got to see a doctor in London who basically said, I can do the operation. If I do it, I'm doing it for you. It's not going to give him any more vision, but you will be able to say you have tried and you have done everything you can. And he said, but he will be back, he will have more surgery, he will get infections, or you walk away today and we sign the forms that say he is blind, and you accept that, and you will have a happy child, and you won't spend your time worrying about infections. I remember signing the forms, and I remember feeling like I'd really failed and let him down. I felt like I'd taken an easy option, but I just didn't have it in me to fight anymore. I didn't have it in me to keep battling. And I also had another daughter and another son who'd just gone through brain surgery like 6 months before. I kept worrying about how would I explain to him what a star was, and it was my biggest thing. How will I tell him what a star is? And I look back now, he's 14, and I look back and think it really was the least of my worries. But for me at the time, it was really important. And around the same time, we noticed that Kane was struggling a lot with the twins. He was struggling with routine. He was struggling with anything that changed, couldn't cope with surprises, and we'd lost some language. And so luckily he was being assessed by people constantly because of his hydrocephalus, and they gave us a diagnosis of autism, which sort of came as a real, it wasn't I was in denial, I just didn't really think he had it. I really thought it was his hydrocephalus. And then not long after that, we'd got ourselves up right, this is what we're dealing with, this is what we've got to cope with. About 6 months later, we realised that my daughter probably wasn't saying quite as much as you would expect. I asked one of the speech therapists and she said, no, I would imagine that she would have had more language by now. She had about 4 words. So we then started the process with Rosie to get her the support for her speech and language and her communication needs. Again, we got back up right. We did all the battles for the schools. We had one son in a special school that just went horrendously because their idea of teaching was that if it didn't work, you restrained, you suffered, the children suffered some horrendous things. We withdrew him from there and moved him to another amazing special school that's just been brilliant and so great for him. But there's a huge thing of guilt that I took him to that school. I just thought he just didn't want to go to school. And now I know why he didn't want to go to school. And so as a mum, I have to live with that guilt that I made him witness some horrendous thing. And we still to this day do not know what he personally suffered. But what happened as a result is he became hugely compliant with adults. Not us, he knew we were safe. He knew that we wouldn't hurt him if he didn't do what we told him to do. He would get told off, but we would never physically harm him, and we wouldn't emotionally abuse him. We wouldn't withhold things that he loved. But within school environment, he was so compliant. And that raises fears for us as parents because he will do something to make someone happy so that they are happy with him. And it opens up so many frightening aspects for when he's older. We sort of plodded along, sort of did usual battles, trying to get plans and trying to get statements and trying to get the support. And I kept saying that I thought Jamie, my son who's blind, also had autism. And people in our local authority didn't have any experience or enough experience because it's so a small number to do a development assessment. So we had to always go up to London to have that done. And luckily this day they just happened to have had a couple of cancellations. And as we got talking about him, one of the psychologists looked at me and went, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" I said, "I thought it right from day dot." And she went, "We've actually got time if you want to do it today." And so we went in for a development assessment and walked out with a diagnosis of autism. And the one thing that's become really obvious to us is that having children with the same label doesn't give you 2 children exactly the same. They are chalk and cheese. What they like is different, the way they interact. Jamie is desperate for friends. He will do anything for friends. Being sociable is his idea of heaven. Kane couldn't give a damn. He would happily go to school, talk to teachers, come home, talk to his parents. He doesn't want friends. We've tried everything and I will still keep trying. But again, you start thinking, what am I doing wrong? And now I'm at an age where my children are 15 and 14. We don't leave them to go out for a drink. We don't go shopping without them. We don't do anything without them having some support, without one of us being with them. My whole life revolves around the fact that I need to be back indoors in time for the kids. And the things that have got us through have been some amazing staff who totally haven't judged, who've totally accepted that basically we were given a bit of a rough deal, and we didn't ask for it, we didn't want any of it, but I wouldn't change my kids' diagnosis now because it makes them who they are. I would change the system, I'd change society if I could. I'd like people to accept Kane in the same way that Jamie, because he has a white stick, they accept that easier. So his behaviour is fine because he's blind and we can see blind. We can't see autism. And it's a challenge because I've got teenage children with hormones who are also trying to work out how they fit into a world that isn't actually all that inclusive. So the staff are the people who make the difference, the practitioners, they're the people who hold you up, get you past that self-pity, get you back into the good place, but also accept that there are going to be days when there's no way on God's earth you are going to get anything like near the top place, you're going to be at the bottom because it's a bad day.